Merry meet. While spells, magic, and ritual can be performed at any time, when we pay attention to the timing of the lunar cycle, we can actually add that extra oomph to our spells and our magical workings. So, from the releasing properties of the dark moon to the attractive properties of the full moon to the balancing properties of the first quarter, when we really empower ourselves and start to learn about the timing of the cycle, we empower our magic and we empower our mundane lives as well. So, welcome, Merry Meet. I'm Aislin, and this is Ask Aislin. So, I'm here tonight talking about lunar timing in magic and spells. So if you are with me live, you can drop questions in the chat and I will have a Q&A at the end. I also have a few questions people sent me earlier. And if you like what you're hearing, go ahead and put a thumbs up or a heart, and it just helps this video get out to more people and reach other people's feeds. Okay, so we are going to start by talking about different ways of looking at the lunar cycle. So, as witches, we know that the moon affects us greatly. And I'm just going to pause and say hi to a few people. Hi, Tanessa. Hi, Diane. Nice to see everybody tonight. So, we know that the moon affects us. When I was in grad school, I had to take actually many classes through the nursing program there at the school I was at. And one of the head nurses, she would talk about the admissions always going up at the hospitals during the full moon. Any witch knows that the energy changes at different points of the lunar cycle. And the fact that we are 75 to 80% water and the moon affects the tides of the ocean, it's kind of foolish for us to think that it doesn't affect us in some way as well. So I'm preaching to the choir. I know that everyone here watching this probably is well aware of this, but just it's always worth noting. So there are various ways that we can look at the divisions of the lunar cycle that will serve us in different ways. So the first division we're going to look at is a two division between waxing and waning energy. And from there, we are going to look at a more extended system of dividing up the lunar cycle where we're going to look at 4 quarters that are 7 days each. And then from there, we're actually going to divide that up into even smaller pieces and look at these little sections of the lunar cycle that are only 2 or 3 days long and how they are each different. So for you watching this at home and kind of thinking about your own practice, you might use one of these systems, you might use all of these systems, you might use them at different times, but it's always worth just looking at the way that we can divide up this energy. So we are going to start by looking at waxing versus waning. So this is probably the most common way of dividing up the lunar cycle. So we're looking at two different kinds of energies. We have a waxing energy, which is very activating, it's very attracting, it is very energizing. And then we have a releasing energy, which is more receptive. It's about turning inward. And oftentimes it's about letting go of things that are not serving us. Now, these two energies, they're poised at two different parts of the cycle, and they're split where it's split down the middle. We'll feel balance in between the two energies. So, first, to start with the waxing energy, this is energy where the moon is beginning to gain its light. This is a time of drawing in and gaining new things. So we'll see this energy occur from the new moon up until the full moon. And we're actually in that right now. And so when we get into the more subtle parts of the lunar cycle, we'll actually see exactly what part we're in. But for now, just know that we are in the waxing half of the cycle. Now, I do want to pause for just a moment here before I go on and talk more about waxing and waning energy and talk about the law, or sometimes called the principle of correspondences. So I mentioned this a few weeks back when we were talking about the laws and principles of magic. And this is where the words as above, so below come from. So we utilize the energies that are going on around us in the universe. We utilize those in our own lives. So we are the microcosm within the macrocosm. And this principle explains why lunar energies and other energies of the solar system will actually affect us. So we can look at this from the perspective of the sun. So we know that the sun is affecting us day by day. Its energy affects us, but seasonally, its energy affects us as well. It's different when we're here in Ostara season than it is when we're across the wheel in Mabon season, for example. It's a different kind of energy. And we're also affected by the energy of the planets. Now, that's beyond the scope of today's talk, but I just wanted to mention that the law of correspondences, or the principle of correspondences, is really what tells us that as above, so below, and invites us to look at the energies that are going on outside of us in the greater universe as a whole to see how they're going to affect us individually. So back to our discussion of the waxing moon. There is a attractive energy that we're going to feel during that time, and it hits its peak right at the full moon. Now, on the flip side of that, we have a waning energy. And we're going to talk more in more detail as we look at the smaller subdivisions. We'll talk about this more, but for now, we're just looking at this overall waxing and waning energy. Now, in the waning energy, we'll experience this from full to new moon, so on the other half of the lunar cycle. This is an energy that is very conducive for banishing, for removing things from our lives, from releasing things. We'll talk about more on that later when we discuss the dark moon. But I always think about the lunar cycle as a wave at the ocean. So if you've ever gone to the ocean, you've watched the waves coming in and out. There's always this ebb, right, as it goes out, and then there is this flow as it comes back in. And our lunar energy is very much like that, cycling every single 29 and a half days. And so when we are in that waxing phase, that energy is coming in, like the wave coming in towards the shore. And then when we're in that waning phase, this is the ocean water going back out, ebbing back out into the ocean. We know that this will come back again, and this is the promise of the cycles over and over and over again. So one lunar cycle, we can think of this as just simply a wave coming in and out. And so why this is so important is that if we're not getting it right in one cycle, if we don't feel like we got everything done we wanted to get done, or something didn't quite go the way we wanted it to or the way we planned, we always have the next cycle. There's always the promise of that. So from this perspective, we are constantly attracting and then releasing, attracting and releasing over and over and over again as the waves of the lunar cycle go in and out of our own lives. So at the very least, if a person doesn't pay attention to the more subtle divisions of the lunar cycle, at least paying attention to that waxing and waning energy can be really important, and just know how it's affecting you, and just simply knowing that it exists. I'm going to put a link in the video, in the comments after this video is over, that will give you a place where you can look and find out what part of the lunar cycle we're in at any given time. So if you don't know how to find that, this will be a really useful tool for you. But just kind of being aware, when are we in the waxing energy versus when are we in the waning energy? Now, if we want to take this all to the next level, then we start looking more deeply at the cycles. So looking at them from a quarter system gets us in a little bit closer, and we see that there is some differences in the energy. For example, that first half of the lunar cycle where we're waxing, the energy in the first quarter and the energy in the second quarter, they're actually not quite the same. So when we have knowledge of that, we actually have more knowledge, and we empower ourselves to make our magic even that much stronger. So within this system, we will have different energy changing about every 7 days. So we start with the first quarter. Now, I am just going to make a note here that this is not to be confused by a part of the lunar cycle, which is actually called the first quarter. That is usually one day that occurs around day 7 of the lunar cycle. So I'll be talking about that in our next, what I'm talking about next. We'll be talking about those little simple, the subdivisions of the days. But for now, when I'm talking about first quarter, we're talking about the first 7 days of the cycle. Now, what happens here is the energy is beginning to wax up from new up to half full, so half illuminated at about 7 days. Now, this time is associated with the maiden form of the goddess. So sometimes people will ask, what gods or goddesses should we honor or work with during different parts of the cycle. So any goddess who is in her maiden form, any god who's kind of in a like child form or the consort of the maiden form would be good here as well. This period of first quarter, those first 7 days of a cycle, are also associated with spring if we're looking at the larger solar cycle. And then they would also be associated with sunrise to noon if we're looking at the daily cycle. Now, at the end, I'm going to talk about how to see how we line up solar, lunar, and daily cycles and how we can actually amplify magic when we line all three of those up. But just for now, know that first quarter, those first 7 days, is associated with springtime and that time between sunrise and noon. Now, this is a really good time for creating long-term drawing in magic. So if there is something that you are planning for, so planting seeds for the future, anything done in this quarter will grow stronger over time. The best types of spells here would be drawing in spells that require a lot of real world work and planning. So here would be some examples. Buying a home, for anybody who's bought a home before, you know this is not a simple thing that most people do. It takes work. You have to get your loan approved, pre-approved. You have to do all these things, jump through all these hoops in order to actually eventually get that home. So doing a spell during the first quarter moon, during those first 7 days, that first quarter period, would be very good for something like buying a home because you're setting in motion energy, and then you will be doing that work out in the mundane world as the spell is also working in the magical one. Now, other things that would work really well during that first quarter, those first 7 days, would be applying for college or grad school, things that are going to take a process of time in the real world. Job hunting. So sometimes when we job hunt, we just kind of go out, we find a job, but for other people, it can take some time looking through ads, putting out the resume, getting recommendations, and things like that. So anything in your life that's going to take some real world planning and work is great to do in that first quarter, those first 7 days. Now, at that point, 7 days comes and we begin to move into the second quarter of the phase. Now you're still in waxing energy, but the energy is different. So this is why when we just look at that first system, where we're just looking at a 2-part lunar cycle, we're missing some of the subtleties of this energy. Now, when we move into the second quarter, this will take place from about 7 days to 14 days, so that second 7-day period. The moon is still waxing, so we still have that attractive energy coming in. The moon is now moving from half full all the way up to full, and the goddess is in her mother aspect. So goddesses to work with here would be those who are in their mother aspect. Demeter is a very good one, Gaia, Ceres. Now, the attractive energy here moves a lot faster than it does during those first 7 days. Now, for this reason, the spells done at this time tend to move really quickly, and they manifest really quickly as well. So if there is something that you want and you kind of need it immediately, that second 7 days of the lunar cycle leading up to full moon is the best time for that. Spells like confidence or instilling some kind of an emotion in yourself that you want to instill right now. Quick money spells, especially if these spells are very direct and very simple, they work so well at the second quarter. Simple healing spells, ones that aren't going to take a lot of real world time. So for example, if someone was doing a healing spell for someone who had a very chronic illness, I would probably actually recommend during the first 7 days when you're laying the seeds for work that's going to take a longer time, as opposed to a quick spell where somebody gets a burn, for example, and you want to just do a quick healing spell to help clear that up quickly. Other things to note about this part of the cycle is that it is aligned with the energy of noon to sunset within the daily cycle, and it's also aligned with summer within the solar cycle. So this energy also quickens it speeds up and accelerates to that peak point at the full moon. So anything that's done closer to the full moon, that will have the most potent energy. Now, After I finish talking about the third 7 days and then the fourth 7 days, then we're going to look at the pieces more closely and we'll actually dive in and look more closely at the full moon. But for now, just know this is the peak point of our manifesting energy, our attractive energy. Okay, so moving into the third quarter, this is where this will begin the day after the full moon and will take place for the next 7 days until the moon is half dark. So moving the other way. This is a good time for banishing of any kind at the third quarter, removing things that you would like to gently disappear. So just like in that first quarter, those first 7 days where we talked about the attractive forces being slower, bringing in things that you want to be long term, good there. In the third quarter, letting go of things you want to let go of gently and slowly is very good here. Now you'll see when we move into that fourth quarter, as we accelerate towards the dark moon, that releasing energy gets really, really fast. So if you want something to let go of here and you want it to just kind of gently release, this is a good time for it. Now, you shouldn't expect immediate results with anything you do in the third quarter because, again, that energy is kind of slow. It's transitioning out of the manifesting attractive energy and beginning to transition into that releasing and receptive energy. So it still has the qualities of both. And it takes a bit of time for the energy to really, really settle into that releasing and receptive space. Let's see, anything else? The goddess here is in her crone aspect. So any goddesses in the crone aspect are great to work with and honor at this time. She can lend wisdom and power to anything that you're doing, any questions you might have. She can lend that wisdom and power to those. This time is aligned with sunset to midnight within the daily cycle, and it's also aligned to fall within the solar cycle. And then that brings us into the fourth quarter. Now, the fourth quarter still has the waning moon energy of the third quarter, but it's quite a bit different. So again, when we're just looking at waning versus waxing, we miss that subtlety between those two different parts of the half. This is where the moon is going from half dark all the way to dark. Now, the closer we get to the dark moon, the more potent the waning energy will feel, just like the closer we get to the full moon, the more potent that attractive energy feels. The most powerful releasings will take place on the dark moon. We'll talk more on that later. But really, I think of this time, those last 7 days of the cycle, being a very sacred time dedicated to birth and rebirth. I should say death and rebirth. So here, the goddess will be in her crone form when this part of the cycle begins, this last quarter begins, or fourth quarter. And by the end of it, she will have been reborn back into the maiden. So goddesses in their crone aspect are very good to work with here, but also death, resurrection, and rebirth gods and goddesses are great, and gods and goddesses of the underworld. Now this is aligned to midnight to sunrise or dawn during the daily cycle, and it's also aligned to winter of the solar cycle. So that is us basically breaking that all down into 4 parts. But we can divide the cycle even further. And this is where I really think when you start to divide it even further into just portions of a few days at a time, you really start to notice the subtle energies in the cycle. So we are going to start with the new moon here. So you're going to get some science background because I'm a science teacher, and you're also going to get the magical background as well since I'm a witch. But just know we're going to get a little bit of science here. So the new moon takes place on days 1 through 2. So sometimes people say new moon is just one day. I really firmly believe it's the first 2 days of the cycle because that energy is just still, it feels very much new when we're at day 2. Now this will occur somewhere between about 0.2 and 0.5% illumination. And the reason I bring this up is there's this idea that the new moon is at 0% illumination. But if you cannot see the moon at all, you're likely to be in dark moon, which we're going to talk about at the very end. So at new moon, we have that ever so small sliver of light. And you'll see that on the right side when you look up towards the moon. Now, this particular moon will rise near sunrise and set near sunset. And I always like thinking about that too, in case you're somebody who likes to go out and see the moon and you want to see moon rise and moon set. This particular moon will rise and set with the sun. So it can be really powerful to see that little sliver there, right? As the sun is coming up and going down. Now, as I mentioned, this is day 1 to 2 of the cycle, and here the moon is between the sun and the earth. Now, let's talk some intentions though. So, at this time, it's all about new beginnings. And for each of these parts of the cycle I'm going to talk about, I have come up with a little like catchphrase, or I don't want to say necessarily mantra, but a little saying for each one. And this one is rebirth yourself back into the light. So, at this point, we have come through the dark moon. We're here at day 1 to 2 of the cycle, and this is like a rebirth, a new beginning. So, this is all about starting over as our intention, setting our intentions, and looking at the possibilities, because it's like the beginning of any cycle. The possibilities are as vast as the universe of what we could actually draw in. So you get to decide what the theme of this next cycle will be when you're poised there at the new moon. And sometimes people don't realize that we actually have a lot more power than we think when it comes to setting that theme right there at the beginning of the cycle. Now, it's a good time for a reset. And I also want to mention too, and normalize this, is that it can also be a time of very low energy, because moving out of the dark moon, it can create some sluggish energy in the body, in both the physical body and the energetic body. So if you feel very, very tired or very drained when you're moving out of the dark moon into that new moon, don't expect to just have that rebirth happen the very first day. It can take a little bit of time. So if you're feeling that way, I always tell people just take it easy during that new moon, that first 1 to 2 days of the cycle, and really lean into your self-care if you need to. Otherwise, it's a great time for just birthing your intentions. New moon rituals are fantastic to really set an intention for the cycle, for the lunar cycle if you want, or for a cycle that will last longer. Now, the waxing crescent, we start to move into at day 3. So day 3 to 6 is where the waxing crescent occurs. And here I call this bask in the beauty of your daydreams. So I think that this is actually one of my favorite parts of the cycle, because you're still in that kind of sleepy, dreamy energy of the new moon. And it's a good time. You don't really have to do anything yet. The energy is very conducive to really just thinking, planning, and my favorite, daydreaming. And so I always tell people, don't be afraid to really dream really big during this part of the cycle. And, allow your intentions, any intention that you set at that new moon, really allow it to play around in your mind. And, just relax. You don't necessarily have to do anything at that time at all. And you don't have to take any action. It's just a really good time for planning. Now, the illumination at that point is about 1% to 49.9% is essentially right when you're going to hit the first quarter. And the moon will rise between sunrise and noon, and it will set between midnight and set between sunset and midnight, for anybody who cares about going outside and actually seeing it rise and set. A great time to send out wishes, dreams out into the universe, and and just kind of revel in the beauty of your daydreams. Because when we move to first quarter, the energy starts to shift. So this now, when we're discussing first quarter in this part, we're actually talking about the exact day that we call first quarter, and this is when the moon is at 50% illumination on the waxing side. Now, I say this is the time to stop dreaming and to start taking action. So like I told you, I love the part where we're dreaming in the waxing crescent, but then we get to this part of the cycle and it's now or never. We need to start putting some plans into motion. And what this can be as well is if there was an intention that was set at the new moon, you've been kind of thinking about it and you've been planning about it, this would be the time to start doing some things in the mundane world that are going to put that into motion. And also figuring out if there's going to be some more spell work that you're going to do at the full moon, perhaps. Now, this is about days 7 to 8. So sometimes we'll say just day 7, but usually the energy is about day 7 to 8. And I will say that it's very easy to get stuck right here. So I'll notice a lot of people at about day 7 or 8, they'll feel like their energy's still kind of sluggish and they don't transition all that well out of the new moon into this part. So the planning is good, but we need to take some action. So the question you can always ask yourself is, what small action could you take at that point to gain some momentum? And I will mention as well that we are actually right at first quarter right now as this video is being recorded. First quarter was actually yesterday, so we're kind of still in the first quarter energy, and then we'll be moving into waxing gibbous, which is the next one we're going to talk about, but we'll be moving into that coming tomorrow. So again, thinking to yourself, especially if you're feeling sluggish, what kind of action could I take? What could I do to move the energy forward? Also, because of the fact that the moon is half illuminated and half in shadows, it's a really good time to consider balance. Did anything get knocked out of balance as you moved through the dark moon and the new moon into this beginning of the cycle? Are you feeling balanced or unbalanced? Because this is a good time to address things like that right now. Now, the moon rises at noon and it sets around midnight. And as I mentioned, half illuminated and half in shadow. So use the quickening energy here to kind of push you through if you're feeling stuck and stagnant, to move past any resistance or obstacles you might feel are in your way. You can also kind of keep your eyes on the prize. What is the intention that you're hoping to manifest? And that can help kind of push you through any resistance that you might feel at this point as the energy is beginning to transition. Now, that brings us then to the waxing gibbous at days 9 through 13. And I call this keep it moving. Because we got the moving energy going on. It's going to accelerate very quickly up into that full moon. So we want to make sure that we don't get stuck along the way. And we want to avoid losing any momentum that we've been building. So if you feel your motivation falter, here's a good time to really do something, get your energy moving. You can mirror the energy that is going on outside universally. So this is a great time to do some physical activity. Even walking is actually great. Walking, hiking, anything, yoga, intuitive dance, anything that really you enjoy. Get that energy moving here and you will feel so much better. Now, this part of the phase, waxing gibbous, occurs from 50.1% illumination to 99.9%, so right up to the very edge of being full. The moon rises a little bit after noon and sets a little bit after midnight. Now, the spell work here is really about drawing in things and drawing in things, especially increasing things. So if there's something that you already have in your life that you want more of, this is a fantastic time during that waxing gibbous part of the moon cycle. And then that brings us to the full moon. So we pretty much transition right from waxing gibbous into the peak pinnacle of our energy at days 14 to 15. So I say tap into your peak power here. This is the height of our creative lunar energy. It doesn't get any higher than this, and illumination is 100% at this part. The earth is between the sun and the moon when we are at full moon, and the moon will rise near sunset and it will set near dawn. Now we have a full moon coming up on April 5th, so that is next Wednesday, so 1 week from today, which means that we're moving into the second quarter, so the second 7 days right now. At the full moon, things that you could plan to do are charge things, so charging crystals, charging moon water. It's also a great time for healing, rituals of any kind. And of course, the highest point of the energy is right at the full moon, and that's where the attraction spells will be their most potent. Now, after that, the energy will sit at that full moon for a bit. So sometimes when people will say, I miss the full moon, you can usually do your full moon workings a couple of days before, a couple of days after. Just kind of know, though, that if you're looking at that wave of energy as it's coming through, so when you're doing a full moon working before the full moon, you're riding the wave up. And when you do a full moon working after the full moon, you're beginning to ride the wave down. So I always recommend, if you can't do something on the full moon and you're trying to do a full moon spell, it's better generally to do it right before, the day or two before, than the day or two after. But nevertheless, that full moon energy, you're still going to be feeling the peak of that power a couple days before and after. Now, as we begin to move into the waning gibbous, this can be like I sometimes think of this as you hit the peak of your power and now it's time to kind of start to relax and rest. So as we move into waning gibbous, days 16 to 21, I say this is called look within and give thanks. So manifestation is done for that part of that, for that particular cycle. And in the first few days, like I mentioned, you still might feel the amplification of that energy, but pretty soon that energy starts to change and you'll notice it. And when you notice it, it's a good time to pause here and feel some gratitude. So feeling gratitude for what you have and the work that you've put in. It's always good to kind of honor that energy after the full moon. Now the time will come again. But for now, this is really the time where we start to shift, turn inward, and give thanks. And the illumination here begins to shrink from 99.9% light illumination to 50.1% on the other side, on the waning side. And then that brings us to the last quarter. So the last quarter occurs at days 22 to 23. It's exactly opposite the first quarter, so days 7 to 8. And this is where the moon is half in shadow and half in light, but on the other side in that waxing energy. And it really, really reminds us to look at that shadow within. So it is an excellent time for shadow work. So those who followed me for a while, you know that I talk about shadow work all the time. And this is when I really encourage people, it's not that you can't do shadow work all the time, but this is the time that's really the best for it as we start to move into that last quarter and those last 7 days of the cycle. So this is a time to pause and reflect, look at what is working and what isn't working. So again, it is a time where it's half balanced, so half light, half darkness. So you can also look at balance here. What's balanced in your life and what's not balanced in your life. Now that release is going to come really soon. So thinking about what you want to let go of. The moon will rise at midnight and it will set around noon when we get to that part of the cycle. And you also may begin to notice some blockages here. So this would really be where I would contemplate what needs more balance and what needs to get let go of, and then start putting that into motion as you move further into the final 7 days of the cycle. Now, once we pass through the last quarter, we move into the waning crescent. This is days 24 to 26. I call this rest and refresh. The energy begins to slow down more, and it's really natural to want to turn more inward, to want to just really rest. I would recommend that people really draw on restorative practices during this time, making sure to get enough to eat, get enough sleep, get enough rest and relaxation, because there's just a lot of that receptive energy as we begin to wind down and our energy is pulled inward. It can feel as though we're losing some of our energy. So really leaning into those restorative practices can help. And it's really important to honor this. We live in a society that's go, 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 and really doesn't allow for rest. I really think that we can set examples by actually taking rest days of our own. We shouldn't be forced to wait until we have to take sick days. We should be able to take those rest days as well. And these are great times to do it when you're in that waning crescent and that balsamic part, which we're going to talk about next. But really, really honoring this energy and allowing yourself to slow down. It's not about making excuses or anything like that, but really, really honoring your own energy and not pushing through it when you really, really do need to rest. So the balsamic moon is probably my favorite part of the lunar phase, occurs here and into the dark moon. The balsamic moon is defined as the last 72 hours of the cycle. So this would be days 27 to 29. And I call this find comfort in darkness. So it may be a time when people begin to feel more anxious and depressed and more triggered, and that's okay. It's really important to normalize that and to let you know that it's okay when that happens. One of the things that is going on during that time is that the veils get ever so slightly so it's thinner. So just like the veils get thinner at Samhain, which we're very much aware of, they also get thin near the very end of the lunar cycle every single month. And so those of us who are more sensitive will feel this more strongly than others. And so it's not uncommon to really feel kind of down and anxious. Sometimes people will feel quite anxious. Try not to resist what's going on and what you're feeling. That really only makes it worse. When we push away rather than lean into it is a much better choice here. Leaning into it and leaning into our emotions helps us to explore what's there and what they can teach us. And we can also lean into our triggers too. So rather than pull away and project them all out and just assume them to be external, really turning that mirror inward and exploring what's going on. Why are we being triggered? We have such value that we can learn from that. And like I mentioned, this is a prime time for some shadow work. Then that brings us to the dark moon. This is the final day of the cycle. So wherever the cycle says that it's new, so if you look on a calendar, for example, and let's say it says that the new moon is 6 p.m. on, I don't know, I'm just gonna make up a date, on the 20th, for example. What that means is the dark moon would start at 6 p.m. on the 19th. So it's 24 hours before. Now this is still considered part of the balsamic phase, but it's that final day. I call this release what holds you back. So here you are perfectly aligned with the energy of release. It like literally couldn't get any better than this. In a woman's menstrual cycle, this is the day that the period starts. This is the day that you're literally purging energy out. That's essentially what your period is. You're purging energy out to make room for the next cycle. And the same thing happens to us energetically with the dark moon. So here you really want to lean in and let go of as much as you can, shed your own skin, and realize that tomorrow, that next day, when the new moon comes, that's the new cycle. It's beginning again. So those are, oh, and I was going to mention that during the dark moon, you can do something ritually to let go. I personally, I always lead a dark moon ritual within our Shadow Seekers membership, but in my own personal practice, I also do a dark moon releasing ritual for myself. And it can be very, very simple, just lighting some candles, writing on a piece of paper all the things you want to let go of, and then destroying that in some way, ripping it apart. I like to burn it. You can bury it. It's also neat to like write it in ink that will bleed, rip it up, and then put it into like a bowl of water to let the ink fade away as you're letting go of things. So anything you can do to kind of ritually show that release can be very helpful there. So I am going to, I know there's a little bit in the chat. I just wanted to mention about lining up the cycles within the cycles really quick. And so this is about looking at where we are at a particular point in the cycle and seeing how we can line up the energies to actually make them more potent. So for example, if we think about, let's think about the new moon and spring equinox, which just occurred recently. So the spring equinox and the new moon actually occurred at the same time. So the energy was very, very aligned there because those 2 points in the solar cycle and then the lunar cycle within it have the same kind of energy. So if you really wanted to do a spell of new beginnings, for example, and you really want to make it as potent as you can line up spring equinox with new moon, and then you could also do it at dawn, because that would be the alignment of that kind of energy within the daily cycle. So this is just one example. Another example would be, let's say we really want to let go of something really, really heavy, or for example. And so we could choose to line up a dark moon near Samhain, for example, and we could do it at dusk. So these are just ways that we will line up those energies of the various cycles and add extra oomph to it. Now, I do want to mention before I go into the Q&A is that if you are in a part of the cycle and you need to do some kind of working and you don't want to, or you can't wait for a part that's more aligned, then you can always go ahead and perform your spell at any time. So just like I mentioned in the beginning, you can do magical workings, you can do spell work at any time. There's no rules that are saying you have to do it a certain thing at the full moon or a certain thing at the dark moon. This talk today is just simply about where is the alignment of that energy. Like, how would we make it the most aligned that we could? But let's suppose that we need to do a working and it's not at the optimal time. So we have a couple of options that we can bring in to play to sort of offset the fact that we're doing the working at a time that might not be the best. So one thing we can do is get moon water from various parts of the lunar cycle. So what you can do is you could set out a bowl of water. You can put any kind of crystals in it that you want, and you can make some for full moon. You could make some for first quarter, so that would be at day 7 or 8. You can make some for the full moon. You can put out water at each point of the cycle, and and then label it, bring it back in the next day, label it. I would recommend don't leave it out so that the sun hits it. You want to just have it be lunar water here. And then label it, and now all of a sudden you'll have all these different waters that you can use. So for example, let's say we need to let go of something, but it's the waxing moon. Well, we could go ahead and we could bring in our balsamic moon water or our dark moon water, and we could use that during a spell, and that would bring in that energy that will sort of offset the fact that we're doing releasing during the waxing part of the cycle. So that's one thing we can do. So creating different moon waters. And you could make a different one for each of those parts I just talked to you about, all those different days and different divisions of the cycle. You could make a water for every single one. A second thing you could do is you could just perform your spell or your magical working whenever you want, and then you could reinforce it later by performing it a second time that's at a more optimal time during the cycle. So let's go back to like doing the releasing during the waxing part of the cycle. So let's say we do that releasing then, and then maybe we repeat it when we get to the dark moon, and that will just simply reinforce the energy. So that's another way you can offset the fact that we were doing a working at a time that was maybe less opportune. And then a third thing you can do is just simply work and play with the wording of your intentions. So you can actually change your intentions to fit the cycle, the part of the cycle that you're in. So for example, let's say that we need to do some kind of healing. So we have somebody who is ill, and we could look at this as releasing illness, or we could look at this as drawing in health. So if we want to get rid of let's say get rid of an illness that someone has, it's probably best, most aligned near that dark moon to let go of that energy, that sick energy, right? But let's say we're at the waxing part of the cycle and we want to do that spell anyway. So we don't want to wait. We don't want to wait almost a cycle in order to get there. So what we could do is instead is change the intention. Instead of saying releasing illness, we change it to drawing in health, and then we perform that during the waxing part of the cycle. So we can do another thing, like let's say love. That's a big intention that a lot of people have. So we can look at this as releasing single life versus drawing in a relationship. So love spells, really most of the time, they're best during the waxing part and the full moon. That would be the best time to do it. But let's say we're in the waning part and you don't want to wait. So you can always change that intention to releasing your single life. So there's always ways that we can play around with the intentions. All right, so let me see anything that's in the chat here. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many people here. I also don't know why I can't see the bottom of the chat. So I did have a couple of people who sent me some questions. Danielle was saying, I love the moon water with the quarters. Yeah, so definitely. A lot of people think that you only can do moon water at the full moon. That's what everybody talks about. But you could do it at any part. You could have a waxing crescent water. You could have a first quarter water. You could have a balsamic water. And then you just have all your waters and you can just use them to amplify the energy of whatever you're doing. So Joelle was talking about being tired. You're probably where you might have been tired at the new moon, dark moon. So now we're at like day 7 or 8 of the cycle. So if you are feeling tired, this again, this would be a lot. This is a prime place where people feel tired right around day 7 or 8 when we hit that first quarter. And usually what it means is that we just got some stuck energy that's not moving properly out of that new moon energy. So I would recommend just getting moving, do some more movement than you're doing if possible, and see if that kind of helps you. But I did have a question. Tanessa had said earlier, she'd asked earlier, why do cycles cause such emotions in some people but not others? And so I did want to address that because it, you know, some people seem to be totally unaffected and other people seem to always be affected, and then sometimes you'll find you're affected one cycle and not a different cycle. So there's a lot of different explanations for it. It can be the placement of your own moon. So if your own moon is in a position in your astrological chart where it's already in a really receptive and emotional sign, you may be more receptive and emotional during the lunar cycle. Your personal cycle can vary from cycle to cycle as well. So some cycles you may feel that you're very down when the dark moon comes, and other cycles don't feel much. You don't feel much at all, and that can have to do also with the sign that the moon is in during that particular cycle and how that aligns with your own sign, your own moon sign. And then, like I mentioned, some people are just more sensitive than others. And then another question, Kristen had asked about ritual ideas for various parts of the cycle, and that to me is in and of itself, that's a whole other episode. So I do plan, I'm adding that in as maybe not exactly the next episode, but very soon. So I'm going to give some ideas of what to do for rituals, and I'm also going to be adding in an episode on constructing rituals too, for anybody who wants to learn about the different parts of rituals and how we put them together. But I would say most of the time when we are looking for what kinds of rituals we can do, the simpler the better, at least when starting out, is usually the best. Sometimes we think we have to have all these props and different things and set big intentions, and it really doesn't have to be that way. The dark moon can just be as simple as just letting go, like I said earlier, writing down the things you want to get rid of, burning that, and releasing that to the universe. And the full moon can just simply be like, sometimes it's just simply be sitting in the moonlight, drawing down the moon energy into you, contemplating, what you want to manifest, lighting a candle, doing some divination. So it doesn't have to be a big production. So anytime that these parts of the cycle arrive, I recommend just doing something small and getting in the habit of doing some small ritual every full moon and every dark or new moon. And if you observe the two halves of the cycle over and over and over every cycle, you'll actually start to just begin resonating with that energy. You'll just be riding those waves that I was talking about. And so again, it doesn't have to be a big production. It could just be something simple, but just make the effort to do it every cycle. Yeah, and as in cycles like the moon. Yeah. So every cycle. So Kristen says, I've heard of the sun cycles, but for some reason I never connected them to the sun. Yeah. Yeah. So the cycles I'm talking about would be like the moon cycle. So just make an effort every full moon to do something, even if it's just light a candle and pull some cards or something, or light a candle and meditate for 10 minutes, or do walking meditation, or I like to take a candle. You can carve into the candle an intention, whatever your intention is. Draw in more love or draw in more confidence or success or abundance, and then just burn that, charge that candle, send your intention into the candle, and then burn that. And that can be a really effective full moon ritual right in and of itself. But I will definitely go into more detail with how to perform a full ritual eventually. Okay. Anybody have any other questions who's here with us live? And then anybody who's watching this back in replay, you can always put questions in the comments as well. And I go back later and I'll answer anything that I didn't answer during the recording. Okay, well, it was great spending this time with you guys. And just to remind you, so we are at first quarter right now. So we're at like day 8 of the cycle. That means we're moving into waxing gibbous tomorrow. Okay, so there's going to be that heightening of energy, and now you can kind of get in rhythm with the cycle now and just see what it feels like. I also recommend, I've said this many times, but if you're not keeping a moon journal, now's a great time to start. And you just write down most days, as many days as you can during the cycle. Just write down a few pieces of information. First of all, what is the point of the cycle we're at that time? How do you feel energetically? Just a few words. How do you feel emotionally? And how do you feel physically? And over time, you'll be able to see some patterns. And then I will put in the comments, I'm going to put a link with a moon calendar that you can go to, and it will tell you exactly the percent illumination and what kind of moon that we're in at that time. All right. Until next time. Yeah. And Danessa says she's ready to get energized. Well, you're in that part of the cycle right now. So we'll all be feeling that energy as it starts amplifying up to next Wednesday's full moon. All right. Until next time, I will see you later. Blessed be.